All right. So, good morning and good afternoon. I am Arzu Demiral from Impact 2030 Türkiye, and I'm the founder at Headline Diversity. So we are all in different time zones, but we share the same grief. So more than 50,000 people have been killed by the huge earthquake in Türkiye. An estimated 14 million people, or 16% of Turkey's population, were affected. So many people volunteered during this process, and Impact 2030's members continue to volunteer in the region. And Impact 2030, we had a roundtable group discussion, and all participants agreed that the support should be long-term because the damage is very huge. And today we are launching our webinar series about earthquake. We will talk about private sector support from various perspectives like volunteering, corporate citizenship, human resources, disaster and risk management. So we will share best practices from companies and civic society. And thank you very much, Chris Jarvis from Impact 2030 and Realize World, and our speakers for being with us today and sharing your experiences, insights, and tips for effective and impactful disaster volunteering and giving strategies. It means a lot to us, so thank you. Please.
Thank you, Arzu. Yeah, it's great to be here. My name is Chris Jarvis. I am speaking to you from Baltimore in the United States, just above Washington. And I was wondering if, I think, Arzu, did you say that everybody can turn on their camera if they like? Is that possible or no?
Of course it's possible.
Okay. All right, wonderful. So if you would like to turn on your video, and as well, just as we're kicking it off, it's the best thing about this is not only the conversations that we can have, but also the connections that we can make. So if you go to the chat, which is the little, you can find it at the bottom, it says chat right next to share screen, and you type in your name, where you're located, and the organization you're with, that would be great. And we're going to start with, I'm going to introduce our speakers while you do that, and they're also going to type it in. So Mayyada, if you want to begin, and then we're going to go to Estelle and a brief introduction here. So Mayyada is the global head of GoHelp. She's with Dutch Post, DHL Group, Deutsch. Good grief, my pronunciation is the, yeah. And so she's been there for 10 years. And she focuses on coordination, communication, humanitarian affairs. So she's going to tell us a little bit, not only about GoHelp, but the disposition of the company to be ready for GoHelp. And GoHelp is a really interesting program where they drop highly skilled people in a critical infrastructure area, and they help to resolve it. So I can't wait to hear about that. And then Estelle is, let me just go down here, Estelle, so I get your title right. Estelle Roth is with Novartis, and she's down in Basel, beautiful campus there in Basel. She's the global head of engagement and volunteering. So she's like the top guru for the company all around the world. And she's going to tell us a little bit about how Novartis, especially using skills and capacities around obviously medicine and whatnot, what their setup and response is going to be as well. And I'm afraid our representative from Pfizer isn't able to make it today, but that's okay. We're going to plow ahead before, and that gives us a little bit more time to dive into things. So in the chat, we've got Palin, who responded, Arzu, obviously, a couple other folks, Mayyada did, Estelle's going to put her information in. And for bonus points, if you want, while you're hearing some of this conversation, for bonus points, if you want to put in your LinkedIn profile, that would be amazing as well. And then we can just click on that and make that connection. Okay, so there we go. Here we go. Basically, we want to know today, Mayyada and Estelle, a little bit about your company's response, what you had to consider. You've already got a lot of things going on. Disasters are never convenient or fun or wanted. And so when they happen, we're kind of like, oh, I knew it was going to happen, but it's happening right now. So just what do you have to do internally to deal with that? So interestingly, we were able to come up with, I was able to do a little bit of listening and learning around the topic beyond anything that I already know. And so I went to a presentation that was given by IAVI that Arzu, you sent me, and it was just an overview. It was hosted by NetHope and Microsoft and a few others, and IAVI, obviously. And they went through and they brought up some really interesting points. So I thought, let's use this as a bit of a foil as we get going. So this will be the first one. But Mayyada, why don't you just give us a little bit of more of a complete picture of GoHelp before we begin? I'm going to turn this little button off here. And then Estelle, you're going to give us a little bit of an overview of what Novartis is doing. And then we'll dive into these kind of specific questions and see where they go. Okay. And for everybody listening today, if you want to just in the chat box as we go along, Estelle, thank you for putting that info in there. You can click on her link now. That's great, as well as everybody else who did that. If you want to put a question in as you're going, like we want this to be very practical, as practical as you can get in a 60-minute conversation. So if you have a question or a comment, or even something that you know from another, like another business or another private sector company or another initiative around disaster response that you think could really inform what we're doing here, or maybe inform it, go ahead and put that in the chat, because the more we use the chat, the more interesting this conversation is going to be. And for those of you in a car or whatnot, totally understand you can't do that. Okay, here we go. Mayyada, if you can just tell us a little bit more about DHL's disaster programs.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. You are quite aware of Deutsche Post mission and vision regarding our sustainability and social impact. So part of that, creating lasting impact, we have some flagship programs, and GoHelp is one of them. With GoHelp, what we have is that we leverage the two biggest strengths that we have at our organization. So Deutsche Post DHL is a logistic organization, so we leverage our aviation and logistic expertise and the engagement of our employees. And together with that, in 2005, we came up with this program, GoHelp Disaster Management, together with UN. So with UN OCHA, what we have is something called Disaster Response Team, which is a team which is deployed. These are trained staff, and we have around 900 of these staff around the regions, and we deploy these colleagues at the airports so that they can handle and manage the influx of relief aid that is coming at the airports. As you know, airports become the hub of receiving aids during or after a disaster. And the second program is called GUARD, Getting Airports Ready for Disaster, which is preparedness. And I think we are going to talk about that also. So out of the DRT, we also discussed that how can we prepare airports better ready to take up the challenge in the wake of a disaster. So we have trained over 64 airports so far in around 30 countries to be better resilient in terms of managing relief aid. So these are the basics. Of course, there are other programs, but these are the basics that I can touch upon that we can talk about. But in case of Türkiye, I'm not giving more details. Of course, I'm going to wait for your questions. But in case of Türkiye, we are going to see when I'm going to talk about it that we manage something that is traditional to GoHelp, that is DRT. But on top of that, we had used a lot of other capacity of our business. But over to you, Chris. I tried to keep it quite crisp.
No, that's excellent, because it is complicated. And as Mayyada said, I have had a chance to interview some of the team members at DHL who have taken the training and go on site. And so I do want to explore all that with you, because there's some interesting issues around getting people ready to go for a disaster, and then nothing happens for 2 years. So that DHL could respond to. So how do you keep those employees engaged and ready to go to? So we're going to come back to that. Yep. But in the meantime, we're going to go to Estelle, and same question, Estelle. When disaster happens, what are some of the programs that Novartis has? And yeah, if you can hint at maybe some interaction in Turkey, but we'll dig into that later.
Great. Well, thanks for the question. Quick intro. So I'm Estelle, and I'm globally responsible for what we call engagement and volunteering at Novartis. I'm with the company since 2007. I had different roles in commercial operations, in vaccines, in pharma, in different geographies in Middle East, African countries, and Asia, and also in global human resources in our headquarters here in Basel, Switzerland, before and until I kickstarted and initiated what we call today E&V in short, so engagement and volunteering for the enterprise. I want to mention that before Novartis, I led a nonprofit organization myself, looking at children's literature before I joined the company. So I have also the civil society experience and exposure and lens before I joined the corporate. For Mayyada, interesting to know, I was in the headquarters of DHL in the past in Switzerland as well. I was leading the legal services department. We didn't meet because that was back in 2007, so a while back. But I also, so I have the exposure also to the logistics industry. And I went through other roles in the airline and in the hospitality industry and lived myself for half a year in Turkey, which is very close to my heart personally. So Novartis is a healthcare company. We are one of the world's leading medicines company. We operate in over 155 countries, including Turkey, and we have over 104,000 people in the world, over 140 nationalities, but also we have almost 1,600 colleagues in Turkey on the ground. So Novartis' response was very bold and holistic, and that goes from product donations that we immediately were able to unlock, but also within only a few hours we were able to decide, or our executive committee had decided to contribute with $1 million financial aid to 2 organizations which are managed and including the entire portfolio of civil society partners in my team. And those organizations are the IRC, the International Rescue Committee, and the IFRC, so the International Federation of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent societies. And I can dig that into a bit deeper why these two later, if needed and if interest. On top of that, employee giving sits also in my shop. I wouldn't say I'm the guru, but I'm in charge of. And for the very first time, we were actually able to do a global and quite bold matching against the employee giving initiative. So what we did is we reached out to 4 of our strategic nonprofit partners who we know are responsible and are taking care of, or were decided to take care of the response in Turkey and Syria. And these were Save the Children, the IRC, as I mentioned, the FIRC I mentioned as well, and on top of that, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So we approached them and we built within the same a couple of hours customized giving links where our people could immediately donate to. And I was able to convince and win over for the first time our executive committee to match all of that. So for $1 that our people have given, we are adding the second dollar from the company. Another initiative we always do in crisis like this is we have an internal recognition program. So if you work with a team and you are not directly responsible, accountable for their tasks, you can recognize them to what we call spark points. So I would say in the past, it has always been used for your purse. You can transform them in points and buy something nice for yourself. But we've really strongly advised our people or recommended them that they could do it in a different way. So they now donate their points to nonprofit partners, to vetted partners that we have in our portfolio. So they really feel like they engage and personally contribute on top of their employee giving response. We've done some calls as well. We have a network of over 400, exactly 430 ambassadors in almost 50 countries. So we have that matrix approach in how we work with our colleagues across the globe. they then took the role to actually cascade any type of information, but also trigger bottom up the possibility to engage in different forums. We at the end reached 65,000 people through also our internal Yammer channels, and were able to engage them. So that's the global response. And I think we come to the local response in a few minutes in your next questions, Chris.
Perfect. Yes. Okay. So as everybody can tell, these are very mature programs. They have enormously large non-governmental or nonprofit organizations as the partners. They've been doing it for a long time. So now we're going to bring it into very localized. It just happened. What did you do and why? And the point of the conversation, Arzu, as I understand it, is to give people some very practical things to consider in the process of being ready for and responding to. So a little bit of this is we're going to talk about a little bit about readiness, a little bit about actual response, a little bit about assisting with the long-term recovery, and then is there an investment in the resilience of the region for when this or other things happen again. So that's the big meta overview that we're going to take here, but I'm going to give us some questions, because one of the things that happens, I find, is that with so many examples, like case study type of examples, like we do this, it's hard to keep it all sort of organized in a framework that I can then take away. I'll probably remember just, oh, I think DHL did this, and I think Novartis did this, but we're going to try and frame this out for everybody. So again, if you're on the call, and there's only a few of us on the call today, which is fine, because we're going to record it. But if you have a question that you think can help us drill down on something so that we can actually all use it, that would be fantastic. Okay, so here we go. I am, by the way, Chris Jarvis. I've been working with Arzu with the Impact 2030 initiative for quite some time. I think maybe 2015 or 2016. She is phenomenal. She's a champion. She is like the exemplary person for being a lead for an Impact Council. And I have to say, everybody on the call or listening to the recording, the Turkey Impact Council is the example for us going forward. And this kind of thing where we can bring people like Estelle and Mayyada in to talk about it. You're already there in a forum group. You have a mission and a focus. You have these connections. Phenomenal. And in 2024, we're going to ramp that up just a little bit more, and we're going to bring all the other impact councils kind of out of stasis from the pandemic in the partnership with the UN, and we're excited about that. So thank you, Arzu, and thank you everybody on the council for believing in this and being in the right place for the right response when something like this happens. I think this is a good example of why these impact councils are important. All right, so with that, here's the first kind of framing question. So again, going back, using that other conversation from Mayyada, which had a lot of great content. Actually, Arzu, I'm going to send you a little bit of a write-up that I'm going to do for a blog after it, that and this. But one of the things that was mentioned is that the private sector has to build relationships with NGOs and aid organizations before disasters occur. Okay, so this is part of the readiness thing. To establish trust and better understand the needs and capabilities. So that involved a number of things, and maybe I'll go through them one by one, but we're going to stay on this kind of getting ready for things and being ready to respond quickly. So let's go back to Mayyada. When you already mentioned massively large international organizations, but on the ground in Turkey, sometimes, or on the ground anywhere, sometimes local organizations may have more insight. Do you do a combo? Does GoHelp do a combo of that? And how do you do that? Find that like local insight, but have that international power. And Mayyada, it's not a big deal, but you're just on mute. Sorry.
That was bound to happen, you know.
I'm going to do it too.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So
yes.
For our program, so as we said that we are in partnership with UN OCHA and UNDP, right? UNDP for preparedness and UN OCHA for response. So definitely we have a very, very close relationship with UN OCHA. We have built a trust of 15 years. And what we do with our DRTs is that we wait for OCHA's kind of assessment whether a deployment is needed or not, or we do hand in hand. Most of the time we are deploying our employees, but in agreement with OCHA. What OCHA does is that, if we, of course, you're all aware of the UN agencies, is that they set up the OSAC through the UNDAC system. So they are the first responder. I'm sorry, I'm giving away.
You're gonna
Yeah,
have
sorry.
to.
Yeah, sorry. So what they do with UNDAC is that within
What
the
is
first
an UNDAC? Is it a
UNDAC
tech
is,
platform, or you're gonna have to really
so
walk us
I
into
might be
this?
saying wrong because I'm not from UN. That is part of UN OCHA, that is Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and UNDOC is the UN Disaster Assessment and Capacity Unit. And what they do is that on day zero, they are the ones to respond, and they reach the country of disaster and create a coordination unit. And we are operational partners of OCHA/UNDAC. And so we are in contact with them.
So you don't initiate.
We
contact that part.
So that I'm coming to. So there are two parts, especially for Turkey. So two parts. Usually this is how it is. If it's happening in Mozambique, if we don't have our business there, we are coordinating with UN, right? That's one part. Turkey, on the other hand, was a very special, very close to our heart also. It's near to Europe, first of all. Our presence in DHL presence is very prominent in Turkey. We have a lot of employees and a lot of business, so 4 divisions there. So that had a different impact. And also we have a lot of Turkish employees, especially in Germany. You know, we have a lot of Turkish population here. So this all was quite collectively. What we did is that we responded with UN, and we deployed our assessment team there to the airports and also to nearby warehouses in Adana and Gaziantep. So the assessment team goes there and assesses the situation, whether an airport needs more deployment, whether it's clogged up, whether there are challenges. Turkey, on the other hand, at least at the airports, they are quite self-resilient, and the influx of aid was managed quite well. In other countries, it's not the case, right? But on the other hand, from the DHL side, from the business side, we were able to connect our internal teams, the country managers, for example. We're reaching out to the local organizations, of course, governmental also, like AFAD and AHAB, and also Red Crescent locally, and other NGOs. So they were mobilizing. And what we did is that we were taking information from them and providing support in all our capacities. So to mention a few, and there were also something ad hoc, momentarily decisions by employees. For example, one of our employees from Hatay was rescued by our employees. He was under the rubble, so they just went. They didn't hear about him for 24 hours, and they just went in a van and they helped him out.
Oh my gosh!
There are many stories, of course, which are heart-wrenching. But on top of that, what we did locally is that we provided many, I don't have the correct number, but yes.
Mayyada, before you go to locally, and I'll probably keep interrupting. So Estelle, heads up, I'm going to interrupt you, which, it's not necessarily a Swiss nice or German nice thing to do, but we'll if we can hold off on social protocols for a second. Mayyada, you said that the regional leadership reaches out to organizations, local organizations.
Yes.
Are they trained on how to do that? Do they know how to do that? Or is there sort of like an email that goes out, it's like, find somebody locally, like what triggers their action? Or do they just know to do it?
It's a human trigger, Chris. So it's not something, so this is something that we are going to talk about consideration in future. And we learned a lot from Türkiye disaster, is that beyond what we do as providing support at the airport, or we also do warehousing and other stuff, we need to have a disaster SOP. So help the locals in face of a disaster of how to reach out to local communities or organizations or to governments. Luckily, our country managers were quite swift, right? So it was a human trigger, a human compassion trigger of, we need to support, where to go, what to do, but there are implications of that, which I think we are going to talk about that also, right? Implications of not knowing.
can I pause you just on how to go? And I want to come back to that before you stop talking. What were you going to say? What don't you know that is a factor? There are implications of not knowing.
Well, the
What were you about to say?
there are implications of, for example, if you're going around and you're asking all sorts of NGOs, you don't know which is the main point of contact that you should be, After that, it was AFA that we came to know, of course. But in the initial days, you might get information which is not really beneficial, So you might be reaching out to, and you might get into, or you're asking for donation, or you're asking for other stuff which might not be helpful, which is not what is needed. So in initial days, it's very important to understand for local organizations, private sector also, that in face of a disaster, which are the different organizations that you have to reach. UN, for example, have their also offices or local point of contacts in their country.
Okay.
That could be one thing. Governments, ministries could be one thing. Then we have, every country knows which is the huge organization that they have. Those could be also reached out. Yeah.
So let's park on that for just a second as we go over to Estelle. So right now we're talking about building those relationships with NGOs. Turkey has a huge advantage that I think could come into play, Arzu, going forward, which is companies that want to respond and want that situational awareness on the ground. GoHelp, DHL, you were fortunate in that you had boots on the ground, you had operations. The Turkey airport is one of the most advanced in the world anyway, so I'm sure there's been some interaction there. But it's that moment, you mentioned SOP, that's a standard operating policy procedure, something like that, but what you're supposed to do. So you're planning on bringing that in place, but Arzu, you and the Impact Council become a mechanism from a private sector perspective with a vast array of established networks to contact as well. So you could go through the UN, which is your established partner, you can go to your regional leads, which you were able to do, or regional representation. But if you didn't have that and there was an Impact Council there, you could reach out. So let's go over to, I'm going to come back, that was excellent, thank you for that. We're going to dive in a little bit more. So Estelle, how are you set up for success with pre-existing conditions for partnerships and triggering specific actions? Is there protocol established around that? Is it something you're working towards?
So we have our response to refugees, people on the move, or people impacted by disaster and humanitarian crisis is part of what we do anyway. So we have those established partnerships. We manage over 50 what we call strategic nonprofit partners, but also we have the locally strategic and most material partnerships in country. So who are we at headquarters to dictate to our local organization who they should partner with, as we provide a global framework on how we see partnerships to be strategic to Novartis based on criteria. But throughout the year, obviously, we do local surveys with our people. So we have the bottom-up and the top-down approach on who are our partnerships and who do we want to collaborate with. Another element, and we have a toolkit for that, and we have processes how you can suggest also a new non-profit partner if, for instance, you are personally engaged on the ground with a partnership or with a partnership that a partner that could become a partner to Novartis. Yes, please.
Okay, and let me interrupt, because that's a very tactical, practical thing. So somebody on the ground is like, look, this is a great partner, potential partner. They fill out the form, they send it in. Now, when a disaster happens, nobody's going to do that. So that's all pre-disaster work.
Yes.
How long does it take you to vet? So someone at Novartis said, this is a great organization, but you've got some due diligence to do. What's the length of time of that process? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it does lead to the next question.
Yeah, that depends on the type of, on the partner. But what we want to really ensure is I don't propose a partner because privately I'm engaged to it. I don't know, in the local school,
conflict of interest.
It has to be, there are some eligibility criteria which are crucial to Novartis. And then we have a third-party risk assessment, due diligence process and vetting process. that we apply to nonprofits as well. From a duration perspective, this can be very quick, and or it can take much longer. Depends also on the maturity of the nonprofit, but also their speed in returning that. But you're right, in moments of disasters and crises like these, you have to tap into an existing network. You can't start it from scratch, be it from a global donation perspective or a local engagement perspective.
All right, great. So these comments have brought us to a really interesting second point here, and I'll throw it up big so everybody who's watching can see it. One of the things that was mentioned on this other call and that Microsoft is doing, you develop a skill, a roster of people, and it's interesting. They said emotionally rugged and can handle austere situations. So that was the angle that they kind of added in. But there is the inference of these folks, they go through training, they are prepped, they know what to look for, they know what to do. And in the getting ready for the next disaster, not only having the SOPs and the protocols and the policies and the due diligence, but finding the right people on the ground. You both mentioned that is absolutely key to situational awareness in a specific context. So I'm going to go to you, Estelle, first and ask, and then I'm going to come to you, Mayyada, because I know you have a fairly built-out training program. Estelle, I actually don't know the question. This, as it relates to disaster, do you have is one of the partners providing any sort of training? NetHope, for example, you can fly your employees down for 4 days to Panama and they put you through some sort of crazy boot camp or something like that. I was wondering if you have something like that. And then Mayyada, we're going to talk about your training program. And then the next question, just so you know, is going to be, what happens if there's no disaster and I'm all geared up and ready to go? Do I just sit ready and nothing happens for 2 years? Okay, so over to you, Estelle.
Great question. So we actually have worked with one of the Red Cross organizations in Switzerland to go through that training, or at least to offer it to our associates. But I would strongly insist on the fact that this is for very little people. So to upskill and to go through such a training, this takes 2 to 3 years. It takes a lot of time, personal investment, and commitment in times of a disaster. And that's also, I would say, the tricky part is everyone reaches out when there's a big problem somewhere in the world, and people think they should go on the ground. Now, we've seen that in Ukraine, but we've also seen it in Turkey. People just prepare their cars, they just pack with whatever they can and go on the ground. This is important work as well, but it's not where our expertise is. So we really try to help everyone understand that there are other forms of engagement. Maybe in the first moment, in the first iteration, it is more on a philanthropic element on giving and actually supporting the experts on the ground, or those who support the experts and the nonprofits on the ground, like for instance via DHL, to bring the needed stuff to the ground. But I think it's very important as well to listen to the needs that happen. I remember one of the first calls we had with Save the Children. They even told us, and they are the experts on the ground, they came with sleeping bags. So think about a person who has just gone through an earthquake and understand, and they want to be quick, fast, and they were expecting more and more earthquakes. A sleeping bag is not the answer to getting out of the bed and getting out as soon. So they refused to take the sleeping bags. So Save the Children actually told us it's been for many years one of their expertise, but they have learned that they had to rebrand and bring blankets into country and remove all the sleeping bags. So who would we be as Novartis to impose and to decide these type of things if it's even a learning at expertise level? So I would say that's
a great nuance. Both have to do with staying warm, sleeping, same category. It's just this one's not going to be accepted, this one is, and that doesn't quite gel with your experience, but you're going to go with that. The excellent example. Thank you, Estelle. GoHelp. Okay, yeah. So tell us a little bit about that.
So talking about volunteers, I'll talk in two parts, right? When I talk about disaster response team, and then the very well established the volunteering passion that we have also in our organization, right? So disaster response team, yes, particularly is trained only to be deployed at the airports, and these are aviation and logistic experts. But before that, I mean, we need to understand one thing. When a disaster happens in a country, the government of that country requests any kind of support from international organization. If the government is not asking for support, for rescue, for rehabilitation, even UN cannot, interfere. They do interfere, but they cannot. So first thing is, and we have seen it, Turkey is a bit different, but we have seen it where we did not have a request. So first of all, you are unable to do anything from the international point of view. For that, we should have more local people trained, and the countries who are prone to disaster, the governments should look into training people from locally, right? So that we are not at the, waiting for international rescuers to come in within 24 hours. So for the disaster response team, as I said, we only deploy when we are able to deploy. And of course, we make an impact, but that is only very limited impact at the airports. We are scaling up towards warehousing management. And as we see that there are many disasters now happening because of climate change and more awareness is there. So we are scaling up our disaster response also beyond just airports. So these are skilled, but these are full-time employees who have their day job and they are on standby whenever a disaster happens, right? Second, I'll come to which we have seen more for Turkey. Second, we have a huge, let's say, interest and engagement in general volunteering in our organization, right? Chris, you have seen that also. So that also, it's not training. We don't have skilled training for volunteering, but we have a lot of sessions where we do enable our colleagues to volunteer. And that we have seen had a very big impact in the organization as a response to Turkey, right? So we had from our logistic capacities, we sent 6 flights, which we usually don't do. We had 6 flights to Adana, for example, in the first 2 weeks. We had volunteers on the ground, an international volunteer providing monitoring donation also. And by the way, we also have something called We Help Each Other, which is a donation for our own employees when it comes to disaster. And if they are affected, we provide monetary benefit to them, right? So this is—
I'm going to interrupt for just a second, Mayyada, on that one. So employee relief funds, so employees for employees, E4E is an organization in the United States that does that. That is becoming more common. You said disaster prone areas, but where people live that are going to be more affected by climate change, which is inevitable. So in those locations, some companies are able to send money to help other employees, but it's not just during disasters. It typically happens, but if there's a personal crisis, like my house burned down, I didn't have insurance for whatever reason, that's a stupid example, but that could also qualify. Is this a year-round program, employees helping employees, or is it just disaster relief?
It's natural disasters. It's actually prone to natural. It's not really really personal. There are other programs in the organization where you have some sickness or anything, depending on the country, that you can apply for some funding. But this is for natural disasters only, and it is a very well-established program where we get information from the country and we provide as soon as possible monetary benefit to the employees. But I also want to come back to Chris, about the partnerships that you were talking about, that if we have partnerships in our countries and maybe that helps us in deployment. Again, when a disaster happens, even if you have partnership with very big organizations that are locally available, the information needs to come from the governments. So what, for example, Estelle was also talking about, the blankets and all that. International community is ready through partnerships or individually ready to bombard a country with relief aid. You have seen it. Humanity is like that. Unfortunately, that creates more challenges for the country than benefit. First of all, the borders get clogged up because of customs and everything, and there has to be one organization letting international or local organizations to tell what people they would require at the moment. Rescue is required, rehabilitation is not required, and what are the items that are required. So in most of the cases, and hopefully most of the cases, it's the government who has to give that orientation to private sector, to organizations.
Where does that come to? They don't call you Mayyada. So this is a great, like, I just want to drill down on, okay, that's a great idea. How does my company do that? Does the government of Turkey call an executive at DHL? Is there, how did that happen that you
So
were?
we have for GoHelp, we are quite aware of this process that we are mentioning. So we wouldn't go around and start collecting donation. We know that, for example, from United Nations, we have some coordination information, right? And then locally, in case of Turkey, our employees were directly in contact with AFAD, so we didn't need to intervene from international level. But we know already that we have learned from all the deployments that it is better, and sometimes it's slow, unfortunately, but it is better to move towards the government information and coordination, because that helps the local communities also. And then also depending on the country, for example, in some countries, Red Crescent is huge, Red Cross is huge. So then Save the Children is huge. Then okay, then we can also follow up with those organizations. But mobilization of aid and support actually is from the government.
Okay, so the government reaches out. It's a pre-set up process. I assume for both to be invited in at a certain level. At another level, employees can help employees if you've got employees there. And at another level, you can just respond as a citizen wanting to do something. The recommended response that you let employees know with some explanation is, we can't get stuff into the country, but we can send money to the country. Now, this does lead us to, again, having expertise on the ground to tell you who's who and what's what and where it could be funneled most effectively. That is absolutely critical to this entire process. And I'm sure you have a network set up and whatnot. But again, just Arzu, going back to the Impact Council, it's a wonderful mechanism to tap into as well, especially because you hold that point of view from the private sector. And Arzu, I'm going to see if you have any questions to ask specific, because you're on the ground and you represent a group of people on the ground. If you're listening and you want to ask a question about any of this, please do. I'm going to add, I want to bring this piece up here, this example up, and see what you think of this as a practical part of your disaster response. So Microsoft Philanthropies, that's just Microsoft's corporate citizenship team. They actually have moved equipment and resources to be ready to go. And this ties into Mayyada. You know, I talked to one of your team members with GoHelp, and they were located in Amsterdam at the time. And but they had taken the training, but they had not, because the government, it needs to be a certain level of disaster to be invited in a certain part of the world and whatnot. This person hadn't been triggered to go. Thought the program was great. The training was out of this world. Some of the best training this person ever got at DHL because of your partner, because of you and the intention behind it. But Estelle, if you have people who are ready to respond to disaster, but they are, for one reason, they're just not going to be invited to participate because of where they're located or the specific area of expertise, or because the government didn't invite them in, or your partner isn't coordinating with you that way. How do you keep them interested and ready to go? Because we all know how people are. I'll sign up for something, I'll think it's great. And then 6 months later, I'll start to think, is it great? And then a year later, I'll think, oh, did I do that? I don't even remember that. So I'm just wondering, how do you keep people ready to deploy? Estelle. And we're going to shorten our answers a little tiny bit. I'm so sorry, because there's so much for you to share, and I'm going to stop talking to you. So we can click over to Arzu and anybody else who might have a question. But Estelle, how do you keep that interest?
So generally, as I said earlier, we have an ambassador group of over 400 people. So it's an established group of self-nominated and others who are part of that network. So we have almost one per country we can tap into. But from a global program perspective, we have an online tool where people can actually see new opportunities coming up. So in the case of a humanitarian or a crisis, a war, whatever, we post those, we talk to our nonprofit partners, and then we post them internally so people can immediately apply. Throughout the year, we dock into global town halls, global messaging global campaigns around disease areas. When we have World Malaria Day, we show that we not only donate drugs to the disease, but we also have volunteer project opportunities where people have supported and can support. Same for leprosy and other of our global disease flagship programs.
Okay.
The same around topics, refugees. So we do that systematically around. But can I come to the Microsoft philanthropies idea? I need to react to that because I really love that. And I will tell you why. So in the past, or in the recent past, one of the now after Ukraine, or during Ukraine, and particularly again in the response and the collaboration with our nonprofit partners, the topic about impact measurement is at the core at what we do. So we have a framework in place, and something that is very different in crisis and disaster moments is when we knock to the door of our strategic nonprofit partners and say, you have to deliver us the numbers and the primary data for us to collect it and then do our impact measurement. So one idea, one of the nonprofits told us the other day is, why isn't there a tool and an app actually that we can provide to people on the ground so that they can collect the data, something very simple. Or it could be on your phone. You're just like, I now distributed that, I now helped so many beneficiaries. These type of beneficiaries, these type of refugees, these type of people impacted by such a crisis. I provided them with a blanket, with support, with whatever, so that there's consistency in collecting that data, even in a crisis moment. Otherwise, how can you then report back, which then triggers obviously a problem for those nonprofits, depending on the size as well. They don't want to put additional people on the ground just to do the data collection, whereas there's really immediate urgent need required on the ground. So I just wanted to pitch that over. So if you have connections to Microsoft to get that type of idea over, I'm happy to support.
Well, yeah, and there could be something interesting here, and Arzu using Turkey is a good kind of example. They are very interested in researching and developing these kinds of tools. They give away, I think it's like $2 or $3 billion worth of software for free for nonprofits anyway. So they're really invested in all of this and helping with resilience. I think there's something there, like I said, like individual small amounts that data can roll up, and maybe with ChatGPT and the AI that they have active, it can be even better. Okay, so great idea. I'm definitely going to follow up with that. Mayyada, how do you keep that guy in Amsterdam interested?
Okay, so I also have a reply to Estelle, but okay, that guy in Amsterdam. So when we do the disaster training, it is not something, it's inculcating the culture of volunteering, culture of responding. So it is not just for, just sit there when the disaster happens, then you're able to deploy. I give you a very good example from Latin American. So we have most of our DRT team is there. They are not waiting for major disaster. They help when they can. There was this fire in Chile, fire in Brazil. So they helped Red Cross, pack packages at the warehouse. So they are, ready to help when they can over the weekends, right? So this is really dependent on the colleague. And also, of course, in Amsterdam, fortunately, we don't have disasters happening or even small fires happening. So our DRTs are involved in other volunteering efforts throughout the year. Even though if there is no disaster, again, for Europe, it might be different if we have colleagues here. For Latin America, Asia Pacific, they are quite, in some kind of volunteering activity if they are personally involved. The second point, I just want.
So they're using all of that good stuff, and they're employing it locally
Yes.
and they're practicing and they
Exactly.
continue to learn and
And
stay active. Okay,
yes,
great.
and this is what I was talking about, scaling up DRT also to, broaden the scope of, support can not only be just at airport, but, in your local, maybe Red Cross
Yes.
or other NGOs. I also want to just add to the information of what Microsoft has, and it may be and maybe not linked, or maybe because Deutsche Post is quite exposed to the UN system. Actually, as I mentioned before, also, UN is supposed to be the first responder, and they set up something called OSAC. Don't ask me the abbreviations now. This is kind of the information platform on the site where they collect all the data, and they're supposed to be, this resource where all NGOs can get information of what is needed, how they can go about, and all that. This is something that is virtually available also. I can share a link, and I hope you guys can link. There are something which is publicly available.
Nice.
Can you click on it and see if you have access? So anytime a disaster is happening throughout the year, anytime they're putting information there, and you have all information
I didn't even
about
know about this.
No, that's the thing. So you have all the information of what's happening, and it's also if it is green, orange, red, depending on what the levels is. And there are more levels to it, of course, that if you want to get more information. So I'm not sure if Microsoft is their operational partner or not. Also, it is important whenever we are creating partnerships for any NGOs or UN, we also have to see we are not replicating things, but that doesn't help anybody. Right? Use the assets, use the processes that are there, and maybe help those organizations to scale up rather than creating another process, altogether that might not be effective.
That's excellent. Arzu, did you and the council see that? Did you see an inadvertent or unfortunate duplication of efforts, or how did that go? And as you saw the private sector respond in these different ways.
Oh, yes. There are duplication of efforts. Actually, it started now because now at first companies donated money, companies sent many equipments to there. That's okay. But then they start to find some programs with their employee volunteers, for instance, but they then could plan very similar activities. So there are some, we need to be more in coordination. So because they are doing the same programs at the same place to the same people, but other people need another things, the region. And it has affected 11 cities. So the area is huge. So this is a huge problem now that all companies, if the all companies doing the same support.
Arzu, you can maybe ask a question or make a comment. The only other thing that I was going to see, if we're so close on time, is just about the long-term investment. We've responded, we've helped with the immediate consequence, but then there's just a bunch of rubble on the ground. We need to rebuild. We need to reestablish. We need to, infrastructure needs to be formalized and introduced if it's been upgraded or whatnot. So that's the last thing I was going to consider here. But Arzu, do you have any questions or comments for Mayyada or Estelle?
No, thank you. And I mean, yours, it was a wonderful tips from you and wonderful information for us. Thank you very much. And what you say, Chris, is very important. And also people from the region say the long term means for us at least 3 years. It's not 1 year or 6 months.
3 years. Okay. Very, very good. Mayyada.
Yeah, may I add a good example that I found for Turkey? I mean, we're saying good, but what the government did is maybe, Arzu, you correct me, the name was National Aid Campaign, if you're aware of it. So, because the influx of donation and other stuff is not easy to send to a country, especially in a disaster, what they did is kind of like an Amazon platform where any international community can go and buy 5 to 10 kits of medicine, and then local logistic organizations were volunteering to bring this stuff from the warehouses to the affected areas. So that made it easier. So that was a combination of the government and the private sector to put together very quickly a solution to provide aid. and international community could, you know, kind of contribute also, right? So similar kind of maybe examples for rehabilitation could be really great, where, you know, the government is initiating together with public private sector locally, and then international community with ease can be part of that.
That's a great idea. And that can include, Arzu, the kind of skill-based mentoring, support network, knowledge transfer. That's a great idea. And Estelle, last thoughts as we think about long-term commitments to rebuilding. We might have lost Estelle. She's a little frozen for me. Okay, that's fine. Arzu, why don't you, oh, was somebody going to say something?
Maybe if Estelle is not there, I wanted to add one more thing that we can think for the future is also for the international community to be aware of how to respond to a disaster, right? So we have seen people do respond. We talked about all good things, how they responded, but we also received requests from, you know, can we send used teddy bears to the children, which is not needed, right? So international community to be much aware of what is really needed in terms of disaster, and should you send your old clothes or should you send new clothes? All these information should also be, you know, coordinated, and more awareness is needed in that. Yeah.
All right, perfect, great reminder. It seems basic, but it is a good reminder, and we don't send our leftovers in a disaster. Arzu, over to you.
Yes. Oh, me, okay. Thank you very much for today. Our next seminar, I will be the moderator, and I, of course, my area is diversity and inclusion, and we will talk about the vulnerable groups in the region, like children, like people with special needs, or women. And our speakers will be from UNICEF, ACUT, and Women Federation. So it will be on 12th April. So come again. We will be waiting for you.
Thank you so much
Most
for
wonderful.
having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
I thank you very much. Thank you. Do you have any questions from participants?
For what?
Participants, do they have any questions?
There's no questions. Palin said it was full of good information. Anybody else, if you want to come up, you ask a question in the last minute.
Mesela Özgür Bey'de sorayım ben.
Yeah.
I think we're good, Arzu. Unless I was in Turkish. Do you want to ask?
So we can't hear you. I don't know.
I think they're just talking. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thank you, Arzu. Thank you, Mayyada. Thanks, Estelle, who left and